Thank you all for being here today. We're going to start with the Pledge of Allegiance. We'll ask the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Nels, to lead us. Thank you, Representative Nels. I'm grateful to be chairing this hearing today, focused on how the Second Amendment empowers women. The Second Amendment empowers women and assists individuals when it comes to self-defense. Violent crime continues to rise, and soft on crime policies are putting dangerous criminals back on the streets. This is happening across the country, including in our own nation's capital. In 2023, so far, there have been 906 carjackings in Washington, D.C., more than double the number from last year. We had an opportunity to discuss these statistics more in depth in our D.C. crime hearing in October. At a time when violent crime continues to plague the nation, women have exercised their Second Amendment rights to protect themselves in dangerous situations while waiting for law enforcement to respond. Female firearms ownership continues to grow in the United States. Women are turning to themselves to be their own first responders. It's important to point out that Black female firearms ownership is especially on the rise. In 2021, the National Shooting Sports Foundation reported an 87% increase in gun ownership among Black women. I commend these strong women and all strong women for stepping up to protect themselves and their families. And unfortunately, some of our colleagues across the aisle do not share these same views. President Biden has made it clear lawful firearms ownership will not be tolerated. We all saw just recently how a lawful firearms owner in Los Angeles had his concealed carry permit suspended after defending himself, his wife, and his 5-month-old from an armed attacker at their home. It is disgraceful that someone protecting their family would be punished in that way. The Biden administration's policies only target lawful firearms owners and do not prevent actual criminals from committing violent crimes. And they fail to realize how more gun control only harms and impacts the vulnerable populations they claim to want to protect. I am so grateful for our witnesses. All 4 of the witnesses here have compelling life stories. I've read all of your essays. I look forward to hearing your testimony. You've come to us as mothers, survivors, business owners, teachers, authors, and more. I'm looking forward to your testimony, and make no mistake, I believe the Second Amendment is for everyone, and the title of today's hearing rings true. Second Amendment rights empower women's rights. And with that, I will yield back, and I will yield to my friend from Georgia, Mr. Johnson, for an opening statement.
I thank the chairman, and I welcome the witnesses today to testify before us. I will be reading the statement of the Honorable Congresswoman from Texas, Sheila Jackson Lee, who is the ranking member on this subcommittee, but she is occupied on the House floor with a very important matter that she is addressing, and she has asked that I appear in her stead. I'm a member of this subcommittee. The right to bear arms is ingrained in the fabric of our country's history. At the same time, we cannot ignore the pressing need for measures that promote public safety and prevent the devastating toll of gun violence. At this very moment, we find ourselves at a critical juncture where we must strike a balance between upholding the Second Amendment and enacting gun legislation that protects us all. This is not a question of choosing one over the other. Rather, this is symmetry. This symmetry requires an approach that respects individual rights while also addressing the urgent need for responsible regulation, a concept that was very clear prior to the politicization of the Supreme Court of the United States. In the past, Congress has understood that gun legislation and regulation must be guided by the principles of public safety, and that we must implement measures to prevent gun violence, particularly in the context of domestic abuse. For obvious reasons, I have long been a strong proponent of women's empowerment. If there are women who feel empowered by responsible, safe firearm ownership, that is certainly their prerogative, and I respect their decision. On the other hand, it is dangerous for this body to promote guns as a viable solution to domestic abuse, because both statistics and common sense show that the answer to the victimization of women is not more guns and more violence. Not only are guns not the great equalizer, they do not increase women's safety, as proven by readily available statistics. Today, guns are the #1 weapon used in domestic violence killings in the U.S. According to the Jewish Women's International, approximately 970 women are killed annually in the United States by men with firearms. In stark contrast, the Gun Violence Archive, the most complete record of gun use incidents in the country, reports an average of only 19 annual incidents of defensive gun use by women. Just having access to a firearm makes an abuser 5 times more likely to take their partner's life. Over the last decade, gun homicides by intimate partners jumped by 58%, and the pandemic was an especially lethal period for abuse victims. Gun homicides involving intimate partners rose a stunning 25% in 2020 compared with the previous year, to the highest level in almost 3 decades. In that year, women accounted for more than 2/3 of the victims shot and killed by intimate partners. And in 2021, researchers reported that more than 2/3 of recent mass shootings in the U.S. involved perpetrators who killed partners or relatives or had a history of domestic violence abuse, or had a history of domestic abuse. Because the connection between domestic violence, gun violence, and homicide is undeniable, we must insist on common sense measures that effectively reduce gun violence and keep guns out of the hands of domestic abusers and other dangerous people who should not have them. That is why we passed H.R. 1620, the Violence Against Women Reauthorization Act of 2021, in the House during the previous Congress, with just 29 Republicans breaking ranks and voting with us. Under my leadership, we made sure that our bill made important improvements to existing laws to address the growing and unmet needs of victims and survivors of domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, and stalking. While firearms are often used in intimate relationships to kill, they are also used to threaten and intimidate, as one of today's witnesses has described in her written testimony. In many cases, homicides, assaults with firearms, and shootings could be prevented if abusers were prohibited from having firearms. For many years, federal law allowed certain abusive dating partners to continue possessing firearms under federal law when a similarly situated spouse or co-parent or guardian could not, commonly referred to as the boyfriend loophole. H.R. 1620 would have closed the boyfriend loophole by expanding the domestic violence provisions of Section 922 of Title 18 to include dating partners. And because we know people with a history of violence against a partner, including stalking or strangulation, are also far more likely to go on to commit more heinous acts, H.R. 1620 would have also added persons convicted of misdemeanor crime of stalking to the list of those who may not possess a firearm under federal law. If Republicans wanted to empower women, they could have supported these provisions to keep guns away from would-be abusers. Instead, these provisions were dropped from the version of the VAWA reauthorization that became law due to Republican opposition. Nevertheless, after nearly 3 decades of inaction and passage of the reauthorization, Congress listened to the American people, chose to act, and passed sensible gun safety legislation. that bill, the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, which only 10 Republicans voted for, partially closed the boyfriend loophole. While I had hoped to do more to address gun violence last Congress, especially as it relates to domestic abuse and violence against women, I remain hopeful. That is why this Congress I joined Representative Debbie Dingell, Judiciary Committee member Mary Gay Scanlon, Republican Representative Brian Fitzpatrick, and others to introduce H.R. 905, the Strengthening Protections for Domestic Violence and Stalking Survivors Act, to close the boyfriend loophole completely. If our colleagues truly want to protect women and empower them, they could join their Republican colleague and support passage of our bill or any of the many bills Democrats have proposed that would remove at least one dangerous element from the domestic abuse equation: guns. The answer to the problem of gun violence and domestic abuse is not more guns, although it seems that more guns is the common Republican refrain for nearly every problem or issue our country currently faces. I sincerely hope our conversation today is truly about protecting and empowering women. And with that, the Congresswoman would yield back, although it would be hard for her to do so.
I thank the gentleman. The gentleman is yielded back. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare recess at any time. And without objection, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Hunt, will be able to participate in today's hearing for the purpose of questioning the witnesses if a member yields him time for that purpose. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from New York, the ranking member of the whole committee, Mr. Nadler.
I thank the chairman. Mr. Chairman, this hearing is intended to promote gun ownership under the supposed theory that it empowers women. The very premise of this hearing is dangerous because we know from the data that the presence of a gun in the home actually increases the likelihood that a woman is murdered or dies by suicide. The statistics are as grim as they are unmistakable. A study of women who purchased handguns found that they faced a 50% increased risk of homicide by any means and twice the risk of homicide by firearm than women who did not purchase a handgun. The statistics are even worse when looking specifically at those experiencing domestic violence. One study found that access to a gun makes it 5 times more likely that an abusive partner will kill his victim. Another found that people living with handgun owners were 7 times more likely to be shot by their spouse or intimate partner, and that 84% of the victims were women. Further, those with access to guns are 3 times more likely to die by suicide. The presence of a gun in a home also increases the risk of an accidental injury or death to everyone in the home, including children. So long as they are not legally prohibited, individuals have a right to own a firearm, but they should do so with full knowledge of these risks. Unfortunately, today our Republican colleagues will try to obfuscate the plain evidence before us. Either they will simply ignore the obvious risks of gun ownership, or instead they will suggest that with the right gun or the right training, these statistics do not apply. This is the tactic the gun industry has taken in advertising targeted to women dating back to the 1980s by promoting guns as the great equalizer. While this may sell more guns, it is plainly not true. We know that training is not enough to protect someone from the volatility of domestic violence because even law enforcement officers face significant risk in responding to domestic violence calls for service. A study of law enforcement fatalities that was conducted in partnership with the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial Fund found that calls related to domestic disputes and domestic-related incidents represent the highest number of fatal types of calls for service and were also the underlying cause of law enforcement fatalities for several other calls for service. What domestic violence victims need is not more guns or more training. It's more support from the many people and systems that should protect them and help them to safety well before they consider resorting to firing a gun. Law enforcement, social workers, behavioral health experts, and every member of Congress have responsibility to protect women and all people from gun violence. But Republicans have repeatedly failed to exercise that responsibility to keep us all safer. Last Congress, the overwhelming majority of Republicans opposed numerous bills that would save lives while respecting the rights of responsible gun owners, including the Bipartisan Background Checks Act and the Protecting Our Kids Act. They also opposed the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, which became law over their objection. Republicans have also had every opportunity to empower women through other legislation. But every time Democrats offered them the chance to do so, the answer from Republicans was a resounding no. For example, the overwhelming majority of Republicans opposed the Women's Health Protection Act to empower women in their reproductive care. They overwhelmingly opposed the resolution to extend the deadline for ratification of the Equal Rights Amendment. And notably for this hearing, they overwhelmingly opposed the Violence Against Women Reauthorization Act of 2021, which would have closed the boyfriend loophole by prohibiting those convicted of stalking or abusing a dating partner from obtaining a firearm. In voting against this legislation, Republicans valued the right to access a gun above the very safety of those facing violence from convicted abusers. Time and again, Republicans, their allies, and their radical judicial appointees have also used the courts to prioritize access to firearms over women's safety. To give you an idea of how extreme their agenda is, the Supreme Court is currently considering United States versus Rahimi, a case challenging the law that prohibits possession of firearms by those who are subject to domestic violence restraining orders. This challenge grows out of the Supreme Court's decision to upend decades of Second Amendment jurisprudence in New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruin, which established a backward-looking test for gun safety laws. Excuse me. Under this new test, a gun law can be upheld only if there was some similar law in effect more than 2 centuries ago, in 1791, when the Second Amendment was ratified, or in 1868, when the 14th Amendment was ratified. These were times when women did not have the right to vote, when domestic abuse was not illegal or even frowned upon, and when women were legally treated as property. In applying this framework in Rahimi, Republicans and their allies are asking the Supreme Court to turn back centuries of progress and to give dangerous abusers the right to access a firearm. Nearly 1 million women in the United States alive today report being shot or shot at by an intimate partner, and 70 women are shot and killed by a partner every month. Many more are threatened with a firearm or are injured but survive, like our witness, Ms. Glenn. Women don't need more guns. They need better laws. Laws that respect their autonomy, that promote the safety of all our communities, and that help them escape abuse if they encounter it. No one should have to face the situations that Ms. Solomon, Ms. Watrell, and Ms. Glenn have experienced. I thank all of you for coming here today to tell your stories. We should focus our efforts on keeping guns out of the hands of abusers and on preventing domestic abuse from occurring in the first place. Only then can we truly empower women. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses, and I yield back the balance of my time.
I thank the gentleman. Without objection, all other opening statements will be included in the record, and I will now introduce today's witnesses. We'll begin with Ms. Alcazar. Ms. Alcazar is one of the leading firearms instructors for the United States Concealed Carry Association. She's a certified training counselor, chief range safety officer, and instructor. She's also the author of several books and publications about firearms, including firearm safety. Ms. Geneva Solomon is a federal firearms licensee and the proprietor of Redstone Firearms in Burbank, California. She's a member and former director of internal communications for the National African American Gun Association. Ms. Shirley Watrell is the Florida State Director for Women for Gun Rights, a pro-Second Amendment organization. She's a survivor of domestic violence and the author of Heels to Holster, a memoir about her experience in an abusive relationship. Ms. Ruth Glenn. Ms. Glenn is the president of Survivor Justice Action, an organization that works to end domestic violence in the United States. She is a survivor of domestic violence and the author of Everything I Never Dreamed, a memoir about her experience with domestic violence. We welcome all of you today, and we're grateful that you're here. We'll begin by swearing you in. Would you please each rise and raise your right hand? Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you are about to give is true and correct to the best of your knowledge, information, and belief, so help you God? Let the record reflect the witnesses have answered in the affirmative. Thank you. Please be seated. I want you to know that your written testimony will be entered into the record in its entirety. Accordingly, we ask that you summarize your testimony in 5 minutes. And with that, Ms. Alcazar, I'll recognize you and you may begin for your statement of 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, Chairman Biggs, Ranking Member Jackson Lee, and distinguished members of this subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to speak before you on behalf of more than 800,000 members of the U.S. Concealed Carry Association and millions of law-abiding gun owners nationwide. My name is Beth Alcazar, and I'm honored to represent female firearms owners, mothers, and educators who prioritize the safety of our families, our loved ones, and ourselves. I'm a writer, I'm an instructor, I'm a doctoral candidate working toward my terminal degree in curriculum and instruction, but first and foremost, I'm a mother. And I have made a personal choice to live as a mom with a gun. After all, I have 3 children who look to me as guide, coach, counselor, and protector. And my journey in and my dedication to firearms self-defense and training has all been motivated by them. Ultimately, my 3 most important reasons for choosing to carry a gun are my 3 children. I'm also a proud member of the USCCA, one of the largest and fastest growing organizations dedicated to educating and training responsible gun owners. Since the USCCA was founded, it has been providing essential self-defense training and resources to law-abiding citizens so they have tools to protect themselves and their loved ones. Nowadays, our focus has expanded to advocating on behalf of the rising numbers of responsible gun owners from all walks of life. And I could not be more excited about this mission. My qualifications and certifications for teaching firearms, self-defense, and personal protection come from Alice Institute, the American Red Cross, Draw School, Force Science Institute, HSI, ICE Training, NRA, Sig Sauer Academy, and the USCCA, with whom I also have the privilege of being editor-at-large for Concealed Carry magazine. I'm also the author of Women's Handgun and Self-Defense Fundamentals, which was written, edited, and designed by women for women on their training journeys. And more recently, I developed and authored Children's Firearms and Safety Fundamentals, a curriculum designed to help equip parents, educators, and children with the knowledge needed to be safe around guns. As with all things in life, education is paramount. And this isn't just about teaching firearms safety. It's about impressing upon all of us how important it is to use good situational awareness and to avoid questionable or uncomfortable situations. It's about how to be prepared, how to consider and choose the best options, and how to live fiercely and safely each and every day. As a woman and a mother, I'm honored to be one of the leading instructors in the firearms industry. With this, I've witnessed firsthand a rich diversity as scores of American women are purchasing, training with, and carrying firearms in the name of female empowerment. For many women, this self-defense awakening has resulted in a new source of certainty, security, responsibility, and equality that we might not have otherwise had. For the women who walk across a dark parking lot every night after work, for the realtors who show houses to strangers every week, for any women who have shadows in their past, and for moms like me with children in tow, I think they would all agree. They refuse to stand by idle and helpless. They refuse to become someone's victim. They refuse to allow harm to come to those that they love. That's why I view the attempt to limit or even criminalize law-abiding citizens as anti-productive or dangerous, potentially carrying grave consequences for the safety of our families and our communities. The reality is violent criminals, many with evil intent, do exist, and they are terrorizing us. It shouldn't be this way. But it serves as a clear reminder that law-abiding citizens should be able to defend themselves from danger at all times, and any solution to better protect ourselves, our children, and our communities should start with our God-given right to self-defense. I can honestly say I'm a profoundly different woman and mother from the one I was before I decided to carry a firearm. I'm physically changed because of how I train, how I move through life, and how I carry, but I'm also emotionally changed because of the decisions I've made, situations I've contemplated, and obstacles I've overcome. And the more I've trained, the more I've realized that I don't have to wait for someone else to care for me or protect me. I am my own protector, and I am my family's first and immediate responder. And being able to keep myself and those that I love safe, there is nothing more important than that. Today, I hope to be part of an open, respectful, and productive dialogue about how we can empower and protect law-abiding gun owners, especially the rising demographics of women. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on this important topic.
Thank you, Ms. Alcazar. And Ms. Glenn, you are recognized for your 5 minutes. You may begin.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, Chairman Biggs, Ranking Member Jackson Lee, and members of the House Judiciary Subcommittee on Crime and Federal Government Surveillance. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today. My name is Ruth M. Glenn, and I am the president of Survivor Justice Action, a national advocacy organization working to support, engage, and empower domestic violence survivors and their families to prevent and end domestic violence in all of its forms. I've been advocating for and with survivors of domestic violence for over 30 years. I am also a survivor of domestic violence and firearms violence. During my 13 years of marriage, a firearm was always present. It was used as a tool to frighten and control me, and a reminder that in a moment's notice, my life could end. Over 30 years ago, when I left, my then husband kidnapped me and held me at gunpoint for hours. Sadly, my experience is far from unusual. In our country, almost 1 in 5 women experience firearm threats from an abusive, intimate partner. I have the opportunity of testifying before you all today, but the reality is that I could have very well been another statistic. I could have been among the people murdered every 7 hours by an intimate partner. Firearms are used in 50% of domestic violence-related homicides. The simple presence of a gun in a domestic violence situation, regardless of who it belongs to, makes it 5 times more likely that a woman will be killed. After the kidnapping, my then husband found me and shot me 3 times. The first bullet went under my scalp, the other skipped off my forehead. I thought, this can't be happening. And then he shot me again in the arm. He left me for dead. The incident occurred while he was under a domestic violence protection order. At the time, that protection order did not keep him from possessing a gun. I did not have the benefit of protections that Congress passed in 1994 that have reduced domestic violence homicide rates. Recently, I joined survivors of domestic violence and gun violence outside the Supreme Court during oral arguments in the United States versus Rahimi case. Hundreds of us rallied and spoke to support the existence of domestic violence protection orders, which restrict those subject to those orders from possessing a firearm. These decades-old, bipartisan laws on the books help women stay alive. As domestic violence continues to plague our communities and disproportionately impact women, especially women of color, it is imperative that we recognize the added danger a gun presents. A woman is far more likely to be the victim of handgun homicide than to use a handgun in self-defense. A study found that for every 1 time a woman used a handgun in self-defense, 83 women were murdered by an intimate partner with a handgun. Congress has long recognized the deadly intersection between access to firearms and intimate partner homicide. If the laws, as written, were implemented and fully enforced, intimate partner homicide could be reduced even further. States that have more comprehensive firearms laws have lower rates of intimate partner homicide. Congress can further invest in our country's efforts to end domestic violence in our lifetime by fully closing the dating and stalking loopholes, investing and funding ATF to enforce existing removal laws, funding research on intimate partner homicide and, violence, and then implementing universal background checks. Every survivor's story and path to safety is different. To the other witnesses on this panel, thank you so much for sharing your stories. For me, the presence of a gun tormented me and my son for many years until it nearly claimed my life. Today, the traumatic experience continues to impact me, my son, and my community. The data overwhelmingly shows that the presence of a firearm significantly increases the chances that a victim of domestic violence will lose their life. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Glenn. And now, Ms. Wottrell, you may begin your 5 minutes.
Thank you, Congressman Biggs, Ranking Member Congresswoman Jackson Lee, and committee members for the opportunity to appear before you today and share my personal story. The following quote by an unknown author sums up my journey and what has brought me here today. One day you will tell your story of how you overcame what you went through, and it will be someone else's survival guide. For 35 years, I was your average female who worked hard to become a successful businesswoman. Growing up, we did not have guns, and I was neither for nor against them. I built a career and a life I was proud of. Safety was never an issue for me because I thought it would never happen to me. Then a man who said he loved me turned violent. He kidnapped me and held me and tortured me for 15 hours. I thought I was going to die that day. When he brought out a gun and set it on the bed, I saw it as my way to freedom. I could get to it, I could defend myself, or the shot could be heard by the neighbors and they'd call the police. I lunged for it. I pressed that trigger, but all I heard is my screams. The gun did not go off. I had been defeated. He had won. Now, I survived the beating, the biting, the whiplash from being thrown around by my hair, and afterward, the restraining order I got did not stop him from stalking me or contacting me. The gated community I moved into, that did not stop him from gaining access and knowing exactly where I lived. He became desperate and wanted to kill me. Thank God his plans to end my life were not successful. I started to mend physically, and it became apparent I was still not safe. The mental anguish I felt remained. Physical wounds of domestic violence eventually heal. The invisible scars and never-ending threats, which can only be felt by victims, control their lives. For me, I escaped being a prisoner of his house, but I was still a hostage of fear. I was terrified to leave my house and afraid to live my life. This is what started my journey to firearms ownership. I walked into my first class scared, intimidated, and confused, and I left with newfound feelings of courage, strength, and confidence. I realized I could protect myself. I could be my own first responder. Millions of women are trying to reclaim their lives after living through terrorizing times like mine. We need to help domestic violence victims, encourage them to prepare to defend themselves. Stop telling them they are not capable of handling a firearm. Stop scaring them with skewed statistics that only demoralizes them. Fund programs that offer training and arm these women. Above all, our right to defend ourselves with our firearm. We recently witnessed citizens in Israel getting murdered in their homes. The Israeli government reacted by scrambling to arm their citizens. Why should it take an invasion or chancing another woman being abused or killed before our government does the same? The American people see the violence. They see the police being undermined and defunded by the same people pushing for gun control. They see the criminal justice system being lenient and almost sanctioning violence. They are realizing no one is coming to save them. They have been buying firearms at a record pace over the past 2 years. Gun control policies like red flag laws, gun-free zones, and safe storage are not keeping people safe, and people want to be able to protect themselves and those they love. The difference between a safe sense of security and real security for me is my firearm. Help me and countless other women like me have the opportunity to protect themselves. The Second Amendment is vital to me. It made a difference in my life and how I live each day. We need to help the victims of domestic violence and preserve our Second Amendment for future generations. We need to stop penalizing responsible Americans and punish the killers and criminals that are making our communities dangerous. I am honored and thankful to be here representing millions of female gun owners and the organization Women for Gun Rights, where I serve as the Florida State Director. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wottrell. And now, Ms. Solomon, you are recognized to give your 5-minute statement.
First, thank you, Chairman Biggs and Ranking Member Ms. Jackson Lee, and the honorable members of the subcommittee. My name is Geneva Solomon, and I'm deeply honored to testify before you today. My journey from victim to survivor to advocate has led me to this moment today, where I am compelled to share my story and advocate for empowering women through responsible firearm ownership. Imagine a childhood marked by emotional and verbal abuse, a place where your spirit is constantly torn down and your self-worth is diminished. And then you fast forward to a time when you've taken and broken free from that toxic childhood, earned a college degree, secured a great paying job, celebrated parenthood, and found love in a marriage. Yet you find yourself trapped inside your own home, forced to endure relentless verbal abuse, physical assaults, and unspeakable amounts of violence, all while holding your precious toddler in your arms. This harrowing ordeal is not a mere nightmare, it's a soul-crushing, demonizing reality that countless women endure, and I'm no exception. As a Black woman, this is not a matter of imagination, it was my lived experience. After summoning the courage to end my first marriage, those threats escalated, and I realized that I had to become my own first responder. I was responsible for my safety and that of my child. With no prior knowledge of firearms, I embarked on a journey to explore firearm ownership as a means of self-protection. Despite my experienced trauma throughout my life and that journey at that time, my determination led me to research and educate myself on firearm ownership and ultimately becoming a registered firearm owner. Today, I proudly co-own Redstone Firearms in Burbank, California, which is the first Black-owned brick-and-mortar firearms store in California. Gun ownership not only armed me with a physical tool, but it also gave me a profound sense of empowerment. It turned me into a woman who once was coward in fear to someone who now stands tall, even in the face of adversity. In my role as a firearms store owner and educator, I've met countless women with stories like and more hectic than mine. And through education and proper training, they too discovered their inner strength and realized that firearms, when handled responsibly, can be a tool of empowerment. When my current husband and I first started operating our FFL, we noticed the glaring gaps within the firearms world, especially among Black women. To address this, I created an educational program to introduce responsible firearm ownership to any beginner who sought to approach firearm ownership from an educational perspective. This initiative has empowered thousands, if not tens of thousands, across California, emphasizing that no one is coming to save you. The reality is there's a thirst for knowledge and empowerment, and it's happening in California big time. Redstone Firearms continues to educate those in Los Angeles and beyond on responsible firearm ownership and advocates for concealed carry rights in California. Through this passion, I have established a nonprofit organization that also focuses on women and other avenues of domestic violence like education, counseling, clothing, shelter, and safe spaces. However, despite these positive efforts, I stand before you today to express my grievances with continued gun control laws that are being proposed and even enacted into California. These rules disproportionately affect women, particularly Black women, and will cost lives. In this opening today, I want to address a few perspectives. In California, regardless of the reason, a person must wait 10 days to obtain their firearm when done legally. Imagine having to wait 10 days while in fear of your life, wondering if the next moment will be your last. And if the normal background checks takes 10 days, and that's if it runs perfectly, but if it doesn't, it could take up to 30 days. There's also a statewide concealed carry issuance. There's no statewide standard for concealed carry issuance. In California, it allows each county to determine how that process will flow. So you can find in more conservative areas that it can take 45 to 60 days. However, in liberal counties, it can take up to 2 years. And this is after completing your educational requirement and paying all of those extreme fees. The cost of guns in California are far more expensive, and recently our governor enacted the sin tax. Who does that affect? Black women? All women, when they're just trying to protect themselves. These rules will have an unintended consequence that will disproportionately affect vulnerable populations, especially Black women. And as I close on my remarks, I remain committed to helping all people who want to approach responsible firearm ownership. But I live a shared experience with women. My voice beats with them, but it screams for Black women. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Solomon. Thank you all for your compelling testimony. We're now going to proceed under the 5-minute rule with questions. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to all the witnesses for being here today. I've said it before, and I'll say it again, violent criminals don't care if you're Republican or Democrat, male or female. We should all be able to agree that owning a firearm puts you on better footing when it comes to defending yourself. I have 2 daughters and a wife. They all have concealed carries in Alabama, but they're here in D.C. a lot, and I don't want them to be caught in a situation where they cannot defend themselves, especially given the astronomical rise in violent crimes here in this city. Yet D.C. is one of the hardest places to get a gun if you actually follow the law. It's not very hard for criminals, but it's very difficult for law-abiding citizens. So, Ms. Alcazar, I want to start with my first question for you. What are the consequences for individuals' safety in areas with strict gun control laws, like here in D.C.?
Well, I can say from personal experience, I'm someone that travels across the nation, and it is very disheartening to go from one state to the next and then not be able to have a tool for protection in that state because of their different laws. National reciprocity would be a huge win for us on that account because there are so many of us that do travel, whether it's seeing family, whether it's a job requirement or otherwise. I think that that's a huge detriment to the law-abiding citizens, especially someone like me as a mom who wants to make sure that the rest of my family is safe no matter where we go.
And let me compliment you. I appreciate you not playing the victim. I think that it was great that you took ownership and kind of said, hey, I'm going to defend my life, my children's lives as well. And so, Ms. Watrall, is that how you say that? In what ways might strict gun control laws inadvertently put women in disadvantages against an attacker?
Well, anytime if you have a concealed carry and there's a waiting period, like Ms. Solomon mentioned, that waiting period for me, when I didn't have a concealed carry license, when that person was trying to kill me, and the waiting period to take the class, that was very detrimental. I didn't know if I was going to make it because I had no way to defending myself. And I understand the criminals have a way of breaking the law, that my abuser was going to do the ultimate. He wanted to kill me. He actually was trying to buy plastic explosives, which are illegal, and I had no way to defend myself. I didn't have a concealed carry weapons license. I lived each day wondering if that would be my last day. So the laws need to empower the victims because the ones that are trying to control their abuser are not working. The restraining order does not work. Red flag laws do nothing but they cause me more of a problem because anyone that wants to can disarm me with no valid reason.
Ms. Solomon, I'll ask you this question. How can a firearm be a deterrent for a potential attacker?
If you, as a woman, as a trained woman, and you have a firearm, it de-escalates the situation. But if you are trained responsibly, you will understand that that firearm only comes out and used as a last resort. So that's why we talk about responsible firearm ownership. It's not, I'm just going to use this firearm to threaten. This is to empower yourself. This is to protect yourself in the event they want to harm and kill you.
You know, and I've often asked, if there was a gun law that we could pass that would actually, do away with gun violence, I'm sure we'd all agree to pass it, but usually it just makes everybody victims who are actually law-abiding citizens. So I thank you again for all the witnesses for being here. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentlelady from Georgia, Ms. McBath.
Thank you so much, Chairman Biggs. Thank you, Ranking Member Jackson Lee, for deferring to me. Thank you, each and every one of our witnesses that is here today. And I want to offer you just my heartfelt, I'm just really, really sorry for everything that you've suffered by. I'm listening to your stories, and you're right, I cannot imagine. But thank you so much for sharing those stories with us. But I'd like to say that empowering women includes also protecting women. Protecting women means providing them the necessary tools to make them safe, to keep them safe. Tools like extreme risk protection orders, which empower law enforcement and loved ones to prevent violence involving a gun when an individual appears to be in crisis or has symptoms of experiencing crisis. Protecting women means closing the boyfriend loopholes and preventing intimate partners from possessing a firearm when they have a history of dangerous behavior. I came to Congress after my son was murdered with a gun with one clear goal in mind: keep the American people safe and decrease the risk of death by firearms, especially for those in abusive situations. An already violent situation might turn fatal in an instant. The chance of dying at the hands of an abuser doubles when a gun is in the house. It doubles. 970 women are killed yearly by men with firearms, and there are 1 million women alive today who have reported being shot at or shot at by an intimate partners. So my heart goes out to every single woman. As I said, I cannot even imagine the horror that you have lived with, the trauma that you continue to live with. My heart goes out to you and the child that also has been impacted by the domestic violence, because our children and our families are impacted as well. And I thank you for coming here today to share your stories. But I do want to say that abusers should not have access to firearms, plain and simple. If someone has a history of abusive and violent behavior, the very least that we can do in this Congress is make it harder for them to obtain those firearms and those weapons that they might use to harm their victims. Ms. Glenn, my question is for you. Thank you so much for speaking with us today and for sharing your story. And in your testimony, you mentioned that the presence of a firearm in a domestic violence situation significantly increases the risk of lethal outcomes. What are some alternative approaches that you believe could better protect women in abusive relationships that do not rely solely on the use of a gun or gun ownership?
Thank you, Representative McBath. There are solutions to having a firearm present in the home or in the situation. And I would suggest that we have other means by which we can protect women other than having a firearm and having it accessible. We can work on the dating and stalking boyfriend the loopholes. We can talk about prevention by having Congress support DELTA and the rape intervention strategies that we've employed. There are many other solutions. What I'd like to point out is that the solution is limiting access to the firearm, whether it's in the hands of the victim of domestic violence or whether it's as someone who is abusive belonging to them. So the solution is really limiting the access.
Well, thank you very much. And we've had before our crime subcommittee many individuals that have suffered from atrocious abuses by violence. And so I want to thank the ranking member. I'd like to thank the chair for this hearing today. And I am committed to, as many of my colleagues, trying to make sure that we are passing policy that protects and supports all human life. And I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. I recognize the chairman for the entire committee, Mr. Jordan, the gentleman from Ohio.
I thank the chairman and thank him for this hearing. I also want to thank our witnesses for their testimony and for their courage. Mr. Chairman, I would yield the balance of my time to the gentleman from Texas.
Thank you, Chairman. This is not a liberal issue. This is not a conservative issue. The rights of women to defend themselves is a public safety issue. It's a constitutional issue. It's a human rights issue. Why is gun ownership among women on the rise today? Women have to arm themselves because the left has made it their personal crusade to disarm police, embolden criminals, and make American cities less safe. How is the left making American cities less safe? Quite frankly, I think it's a very simple plan and is done intentionally. First, step one, defund the police. Step two, enact pro-criminal policy. Step three, open borders. And step four, finally, take away your constitutional right to defend yourselves and your family. What is the end result? Is absolute chaos. We've seen it for the past few years. You see, when public safety collapses, who bears the brunt of it? It's women and children. The left has created this dangerous environment in American cities, and now they want to take away women's last line of defense, and that is gun ownership. I've read countless stories across the country of courageous acts of self-defense where women have saved their lives with a firearm when attacked by a man much stronger than they are. This is something that I take personally in the state of Texas. In June this year, a pregnant woman in Houston was simply pumping gas into her car when a suspicious man approached her and demanded her purse. She drew her legally concealed firearm on this man, and he fled immediately. You see, the gun is the great equalizer against dangerous predators and oftentimes the last line of defense for women when it comes to protecting themselves and their children. This story would have ended much differently in DC and other Democrat-run cities. You see, in liberal cities, only criminals have guns because the left is too busy disarming law-abiding citizens like yourselves. Let's recap this. In the past few years, the left has focused on defunding the police, passing pro-criminal policies, opening the border, and taking away your constitutional rights to bear arms. Ms. Solomon, thank you for being here, ma'am. You're absolutely wonderful. You're probably aware that there has been an 87% increase in gun ownership amongst Black women. Black women are the fastest growing groups of gun owners in the entire country. And no wonder why. Because many of these Black women live in Democrat-run cities with liberal policies. There are people like you, ma'am, who have every right to purchase and own a firearm for your own defense. You women have also described your issues with domestic violence. I'm so sorry to hear that. I have a 4-year-old daughter and a 3-year-old daughter at my home. We are armed at my home, and they will learn how to responsibly carry firearms to prevent this from happening to them at some point in the future. It's devastating. We've got to put an end to it, but not by disarming you. Ms. Solomon, unfortunately, ma'am, I've got some bad news for you. You see, your gun shop happens to be located in the People's Republic of California, and your governor and your state legislature are probably not big fans of people like you. If you don't mind, ma'am, could you please discuss with me some of the radical gun control laws that California has enacted to hurt your business?
Absolutely, thank you. I wanted to get to that in my opening statement. California had a big win when the Supreme Court allowed and opened up concealed carry in California. Before, it was very subjective and not objective. It was a matter of knowing that county's particular, you had to be in that person's pocket, so to speak, or have a friendship. And so it was a just cause. It wasn't if you passed a background check. And we found that those in liberal counties can never get a concealed carry weapons permit. But those in conservative counties, sure. And then you have to look at who lives there, who lives in Orange County, and then who lives in Los Angeles County. Then you have your 10-day waiting period. Okay, well, yes, there is a restraining order that can be issued in 24 hours, but what about that woman who went and bought a firearm and has to now wait 9 more days? Or a sin tax. When a woman is just moving away, she might have to flee with nothing. And so California already has the highest cost of a firearm in the nation, and now you want to go and add in a 20% tax.
One last question before I run out of time, real quick. How many people are purchasing guns that look like you and me?
87% more.
You got it. Man, thank you all so much for being here. God bless y'all, and I really appreciate it. Yeah, you'll bet the rest of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes the ranking member of the entire committee, Mr. Nadler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Glenn, you are here to share your personal story and on behalf of your organization, Survivor Justice Action, which works with thousands of survivors of domestic violence and their families. And you previously served as the president of the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence. Based on your many years working with survivors, what do they need from Congress or others to get to safety, remain safe, and heal from their experience?
Thank you, Representative Nadler. I would suggest that they need not to be in the presence of a firearm. That would be first. Secondly, there are so many other actions that Congress can take to ensure that domestic violence victims and survivors have what they need to remain safe. One of the things that I'd like to have us remember as we're talking about this is that many times domestic violence abusers do not have a criminal record. And that's really important to remember, because the premise is that if we allow criminals to have firearms, then we're at risk. I go back to prevention. I apologize. I go back to prevention. What we need to be talking about is how do we empower young women and young men to understand that domestic violence is not okay, and that we need to put measures in place that prevent domestic violence so that we never have to have this conversation. I and the other witnesses would never have experienced what we've experienced. One of the things that is lacking and needs to be addressed is prevention of domestic violence.
Thank you, Ms. Glenn. Some have expressed a very bleak view of the world for women, where they cannot rely on family, their communities, law enforcement, or others for help. Is this true? How can women who are experiencing abuse right now be connected with people who can help them?
Very easily, through the National Domestic Violence Hotline, for instance. They can more readily get protection orders that do provide them yet another barrier to safety. I think that we need to be talking about more immediate and ready protections for those that are experiencing violence versus what might be the waiting period for a firearm, for instance. The quicker that we remove victims from that type of danger, the safer they are.
Thank you, Ms. Glenn. A recent study found that roughly 1 in 7 women had experienced non-fatal abuse with a firearm by an intimate partner, including being shot at or threatened with a firearm. Do you believe these women would be safer if they had a firearm?
I do not, because I still go back to, and the data shows that the mere presence of a firearm makes it 5 times more likely that a woman will be killed. A woman will be killed in those situations.
Thank you. And Ms. Glenn, researchers found that 68% of mass shootings involved either the killing of a family member or intimate partner, or that the shooter had a history of domestic violence. How do domestic violence restraining orders promote the safety of those experiencing abuse, as well as promote public safety?
I would suggest that the piece of paper itself is not the protection. Absolutely. I could attest to many survivors who've been informed by their abusive person that it's a piece of paper. What I would suggest is that the protection order allows for the documentation of that abuse and ensures that, for instance, if the survivor is seeking out other types of safety, that they have the protection order as a document that shows that there's been that abuse.
Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Nels.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, ladies, for being here. For those watching at home, I want to be clear what this is about. Joe Biden wants to take your guns. He does. He wants to infringe on your Second Amendment rights. He wants to strip you of the ability to protect your family, your community, your country. It's dangerous. It's unconstitutional, and it does nothing to address crime. Criminals will still have guns long after law-abiding citizens don't. I'd like to turn your attention to an incident that happened in June near my district in Houston. Play the clip. This was what Mr. Hunt was referencing. We don't have audio, but you see this knucklehead here, and he's in the gray truck, and he gets up there, and he obviously has a pistol. There's a pregnant woman standing there with her husband. This guy gets a little bit bold. Look at it, he points the gun. He's going to try to rob them. Goes across, he approaches them, pistol whips the man, the husband, and the woman gets out and she shoots him, pulls out her pistola and shoots him. Not only protecting herself, but protecting her husband, her unborn child. Unfortunately, the suspect was taken to the hospital where he survived. I wish he would have been a better shot. It would have reduced recidivism. Because guys like this get back out on the streets. They get back out on the streets. They'll do the same damn thing. I think you've seen a rise in gun sales because the American people truly understand that they always can't count on the government to protect them. I served in law enforcement for 30 years. I was a sheriff of a very large county. I've been to several homicides. Several of them related to domestic abuse. Several of them where their husbands went out there and just brutally murdered the entire family. There were times I reflect now and I say to myself, maybe I wish that mother, that woman who could have received training and been a responsible gun owner, would have had an opportunity to protect her children and herself from that husband, the boyfriend, and the numerous other women that were just brutally murdered by just criminals. Now, many of these guys may have had some mental health issues. I got it. But they had nothing there to protect themselves. And if they would have had something, such as a firearm, maybe they would be able to talk to us today. Ms. Solomon, as a former lawman, we've carried guns every day. And I can tell you, there's not a law enforcement officer in the country today that wakes up, says, I want to go out and legally kill somebody. What do you think that woman was thinking after she was out there and she points a gun and shoots that guy? I mean, how will that affect her for the rest of her life? I mean, what do you think she's thinking about her mental health? How do you think that will affect her for the rest of her life?
I definitely do believe that she didn't wake up that day and say, I wanted to kill anybody.
Right.
She will feel empowered that she was able to save herself and her husband or whoever that was, her family member. But she will have access to get better and over that and eventually still carry a firearm. She will feel empowered. And I believe she was pregnant. And so it's going to empower her and that child that comes into the world that they're not a victim.
She should be here sharing her story as well one day, talking about how that weapon saved her life. Maybe looking at her training. How did she acquire that? And what type of training? And did she become proficient at it? We got a lot of people that want to carry a gun, but they don't go through that training. I would encourage everybody at least get proficient with that firearm so you know how to use it. Ms. Wottrell, you mentioned in your testimony that several major cities who have adopted some of the strictest gun control laws in the country remain unsafe still today. Do you think more gun control laws would have prevented that suspect in the video from illegally obtaining a gun?
No, criminals are going to get a firearm, whether it's against the law or not. They don't care how many laws they break. And when I carry to save a life, my life, not to take a life. Mm-hmm. So when someone is faced with a situation when they have to defend themselves and take a life, I'm sure it's very hard to accept that, but yet they're very happy because they're here to talk about it.
Yes, thank you. And Ms. Glenn, would you agree to, Chicago, some of the strictest gun control laws in the country, they're out there. I mean, red flag laws, can't have a concealed weapon without a permit, background checks, lock and store the guns. I mean, they have the strictest, but yet, they have gun violence up through the moon. There were over 2,800 shootings in Chicago last year, 1,300 in LA, 1,200 in New York. I'm telling you right now, Tommy Turd does not care about gun laws. They're going to have them. It will just affect the law-abiding citizen.
Gentleman's time is expired. You may answer the question if you wish.
I don't have the expertise, and I'm not here on the expertise about gun laws in those cities. What I'm here about is how do we ensure that those that are abusive do not have access to a firearm in which a woman can be killed.
Chair recognizes the gentlelady from Pennsylvania, Ms. Dean.
I thank the chair and the ranking lady. I thank you very, very much, ranking member. To all of our witnesses today, I have to say I'm in awe of your courage, your testimony, your willingness to bring your experiences here to us so that we can craft better policy. I can't imagine how difficult it is to talk about the painful experiences you endured, in some cases year after year, day after day, especially Ms. Solomon, Ms. Glenn, and Ms. Wittrall. And I thank you, Ms. Alcazar, for bringing your perspective and your courage and strength. Still, I want to focus on the facts. We have to focus on the data. We have to focus on the facts if we're going to save lives. I couldn't help but think of the many women, on average 70 women a month, who can't speak before us as you have so courageously because their abusers used a gun to murder them. Our laws failed to protect these women. We, as lawmakers, failed to protect them when we know that access to a gun makes an abuser, and we've heard the statistic, but we really have to focus on it, makes an abuser 5 times more likely to kill his female partner. We also know that when an abused woman purchases a gun for protection, or if there's another gun in the house for whatever reason, statistically speaking, the risk that her partner will kill her doubles, 5 times and 2 times. That's why we have to be serious. We have to be honest. We can't spout the lies that we've heard on the other side. From the other side, we've actually had hearings where we don't want to defund the police. They want to defund and disband ATF. Imagine that. They don't want us chasing down criminals. So we can't turn away from these alarming facts. Ms. Glenn, as a survivor yourself, what does the premise, and you talked about actually going out before the Supreme Court, what does the premise of Rahimi case mean to you? In other words, that a man, the holding is, that a man subject to a domestic violence restraining order should nevertheless be able to own a gun. What does that mean to you?
Thank you so much for that question. The premise being that if I'm a survivor or victim of domestic violence and I am expected that I expect that a domestic violence protection order is going to protect me, how come I'm not protected from the very thing that will cause me harm, which is the firearm?
Well said.
It's very, very troubling. The access that that abusive person may have to that firearm, even if I'm under protection order, is removed.
Well said. Ms. Solomon, again, thank you for your courage to defend yourself and your child. I cannot imagine what you have gone through and how that really inspired in you to be different, to start a business in this same area. And I really honor the way you keep talking about responsible gun ownership. That is what we want in this country. We don't want to take everybody's gun away, but we want responsible gun ownership, and we want those who shouldn't possess a gun not to possess it. I will talk about your business for just a moment. I was concerned to learn that your business received Demand 2 letters from the ATF 2 years in a row, I believe, both in 2022 and in 2023. For those who don't know, Demand 2 is a program, a requirement under the Department of Justice, ATF, that helps local and state law enforcement trace crime guns. Currently, gun dealers are added to the program if they have had 25 or more guns traced to their dealership with a time to crime, I know you're familiar with this, which is the period between the initial sale of the gun and the recovery of the crime of 3 years or less. I want to be absolutely clear. You're getting those letters, and requiring you to participate in the program does not mean you've done anything wrong, but it is unusual. Only about 3% of FFLs are subject to that program, the Demand 2 program. So I would like to talk to you about solutions. You're intimately close up with the sale, the transaction, the training, You know that many of these guns that have been sold through your FFL have been traced to crimes. You must be thinking about the solutions. What are some of the solutions, other than, I know why people are here today to say arm more women. What are some of the other solutions to prevent gun violence and to prevent guns getting into the hands of criminals?
The one thing that we have to address is that people within the African American or Black community for years and hundreds of years have been starving for firearms education. And recently, with my work that I've been doing alongside my husband at Redstone Firearms, is education. We have only been doing this for 7 years, alongside the National African American Gun Association. Our organization needs support to continue to get the education out there. Because approaching firearm ownership from an uneducated perspective, when we have been starved of that education, you're going to end up with things like that. And so we are teaching the education and we support it. Our mission is to consult, educate, and train.
Let me ask you about...
I'm sorry, your time has expired.
Oh, I apologize. I didn't realize it. I apologize.
Thank you, no problem. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Dean. Ms. Lee, sorry, I apologize.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you to each of the brave women here today representing your organizations for sharing your stories to help inform us as a committee and also to empower other women. I will always fight to protect the constitutional rights of law-abiding gun owners and women who are trained how to properly own and safely shoot a firearm are not just gaining a tactical skill. A woman with a firearm who's trained and understands how to use it has a line of defense against a home invader, a dangerous partner, or just any random act of violence. And as we have seen from our victims of violent crime hearings here in the Judiciary Committee, cities like Chicago, New York, and even Washington, D.C. are facing rampant, rising violent crime rates. So it is as important as ever for us all to be empowered and to be prepared. Women across the nation have the ability to defend themselves, their children, and their families. When we empower women and self-defense, we all benefit. I am especially proud to have Ms. Shirley Wottrell here today with us. As we've heard, she holds many titles as a firearms instructor and author, and also is my fellow Floridian. So thank you for being here today to share with us your testimony and your insight. I'd like to start here. Earlier during our hearing, Ms. Glenn testified about the significance of injunctions or protection orders and also hotlines as tools for survivors to escape abusive situations. And I agree those are important tools, but I'd like to hear your perspective on whether those tools are adequate or whether we need to be further empowering women to protect themselves and their families.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Speaking from my experience, my restraining order did not stop my abuser. The restraining order, as has been said many times, is a piece of paper. It's just for record. So that piece of paper is not going to keep me safe. So I have to learn and figure out a way to defend myself. Like I said, there was plenty of times I knew that this person was trying to kill me. I had to depend on the law enforcement. But what if they didn't know what he was doing or where he was? Who was going to come to and save me but me? And that's why I carry. I carry because my life is important to me now. And I'm going to also share, my first firearms class wasn't just about learning to protect myself. It changed me internally. Who I was, how I acted, who I engaged with, and how I let people treat me. And that is more important. And I think a key to putting an end to domestic violence is empowering our young women so they don't accept unacceptable behavior. And they start understanding that their life is worth something more than what someone else is trying to tell you.
And on that subject, how is it that you believe firearm ownership in particular helps contribute to the concept of gender equality when it comes to self-defense?
Well, once again, I'll share from my experience. When I was trying to fight my way out of being held hostage in my abuser's home, I could not overpower him. There was nothing I did. I tried everything that I knew, and everything failed. My only goal, when he, like I said, when he brought that firearm, that was going to be my salvation, my freedom. I was either going to defend myself or alert the neighbors. And to my disappointment, the gun did not go off. So I think it's very important, and it's very important to me, to be able to defend myself, and my equalizer I choose is a firearm.
Another thing that you've touched on is the concept of abusers and repeat offenders getting back out on the street or not being held to account for their crimes. Tell us, if you would, how soft on crime policies that allow those repeat offenders or abusers to remain at large and at liberty are endangering women, and how you have seen that affect women in America.
Well, just based on the media that I hear, there are so many times that an offender, a criminal, is out on the streets with hardly any bail, and they're repeat offenders. If they're repeat offenders, that means they're going to do the violent crime that they've already been doing. So if we put them and make them accountable for their crimes, that makes our communities safer. And women need to feel that the government is behind them. If I am going to put myself out there and I'm going to go to court against my abuser, I want to know that the government is going to be there behind me and make sure that he does his time. And he doesn't, that early dismissal, that he can come out and then threaten me some more. I want to know the government's there and going to stop him from doing that.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to recognize the folks who are here from Moms Demand Action. Thank you all for being here. You all want to see Congress do something to prevent the kind of situation where we have to teach our children, our young girls, that before you can be respected, you've got to have a gun. We want a world, they want a world where you don't have to where you don't train your boys to say that the mark of being a man is to have a gun and have a bigger gun than the guy next door to you. We want they want a world of common sense gun reform. And, we're having this hearing today. Republicans in control of Congress since January 3rd of this year. Took them 15 rounds of decision-making and voting to elect a speaker, and then 9 months later, after having done absolutely nothing during the 9 months, they get rid of the speaker and elect a new speaker. Now we got a new speaker, and instead of doing something to improve the lives of the American people, we're sitting here today at a hearing showing a doctored video. You can't trust these videos that they put up on the screen with the super predator, shooting somebody, all of these kinds of subliminal messaging that they're doing. You can't trust these videos that they're putting out there because you didn't even see the whole thing. What happened? What caused, what was it really that happened? And then what has happened since then? Was anybody held accountable for shooting anybody? Was it justified or not? You don't know those things, but you stand up here and grandstand on a perhaps doctored video, and this is a hearing where there's not a single policy proposal that we're discussing. It's just simply a title, Second Amendment Rights Empower Women's Rights. Well, I'll tell you, we need to, I don't want to see women's rights empowered by women going into a doctor's office demanding an abortion at gunpoint. I don't want to see a society like that. Got to be a better way for human beings to exist on this planet and know how to live together. But let me ask this question, Ms. Wittrall. You said earlier that rather than control the aggressor, we should be focusing on gun laws that empower the victim. Do you think that laws that prohibit possession of firearms by people convicted of domestic violence, do you think that those laws are okay to prevent such people, convicted people, from owning firearms?
Thank you, Congressman, for that question.
Is
I
that
am
yes or
here-
no?
Excuse me?
Yes or no? Do you think that those laws are good laws?
I am here speaking as a victim of domestic
Okay,
violence.
well, I'll take it then that my time is running, that you don't support those laws. Do you support laws that would keep firearms out of the hands of people convicted of domestic violence, Ms. Solomon?
I am here to talk about empowering women.
So you're not going to answer the question either? How about you, Ms. Alcazar? You
I would
support
agree.
those laws?
I would agree with my fellow witnesses that we're here to talk about empowering women.
Okay,
And
all
instead
right.
of talking
Well,
about the
don't you
things
think
that we
that
can
it
take away
empowers
from women.
when
To take away?
when people who have been convicted of domestic violence are not allowed to own firearms? Doesn't that help?
I think it empowers women. The definition of empowerment is what we all need to focus on right
Let me
here,
ask-
right now,
let me ask
because
this
empowering is
question.
not
Let me
taking
ask this
away.
question of Ms.
Empowering is
Glenn,
giving
because
to
Ms. Alcazar,
and
you're not
providing
answering my
information and
question,
providing
and I
education.
control my time. Ms. Glenn, do you support laws that would keep firearms out of the hands of persons convicted of domestic violence and those under restraining orders?
Absolutely.
Why?
Because of the presence of a firearm and the danger that it represents for victims and survivors of domestic violence, no matter who the firearm belongs to. The data shows that 5 times more likely to have a woman killed when there is a firearm present.
Thank you. Mr.
Gentleman's time
Chairman,
has expired.
I'd lastly like to offer this article. Red states have higher gun death rates than blue states, and here's why. I'd like to offer this for the record.
Without objection.
Thank you. I yield back.
Chair recognizes the gentlelady from Texas, the ranking member of the Subcommittee on Crime, Ms. Jackson Lee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm very happy to be able to welcome the witnesses here and listen to my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, and really find no reason for us to be here today because none of us should be in disagreement of empowering women and choosing the basis of the empowerment that they would utilize to be safe. I think it is important for women to be empowered. We need to respect the individual rights while also addressing the urgent need for responsible regulation, a concept that is very clear prior to the politicalization of the Supreme Court of the United States. We can do both. For obvious reasons, I've been a strong proponent of women's empowerment. And if there are women who feel empowered by responsible, safe firearm ownership, that is certainly their prerogative, and I respect their decision. On the other hand, women who have a different perspective should also be safe with the kinds of gun laws that will provide them safety, common sense gun laws. And certainly in a domestic violence situation, their abusers should not have a gun to be able to use against them. I can never talk about this issue without mentioning Sergeant Preston in Houston, Texas, who enforces in his life, he is now deceased, that the domestic violence calls are some of the most dangerous calls that are ever made. And he lost his life protecting a mother and son. They lived, but he died answering a domestic violence call. And I always want to pay tribute to Sergeant Preston. I also want to put into the record, Mr. Chairman, before amicus brief led by the House Gun Violence Prevention Task Force, signed by 151 representatives and 18 senators, filed in U.S. versus Rabini, and just take one quote that I think is important. The only difference between a battered woman and a dead woman is the presence of a gun. So we know
Without
that.
objection.
I thank you. We know that we have to be safe when we talk about gun use. And let me put into the record as well some statistics that are important as I begin to ask my questions. Just having access to a firearm makes an abuser 5 times more likely to take their partner's life. Over the last decade, gun homicides by intimate partners jumped 58%, and the pandemic was an especially lethal period
for abuse victims. Gun homicides involving intimate partners rose a stunning 25% in 2020, compared with the previous year to the highest level in almost 3 decades. And in that year, women accounted for more than 2/3 of the victims shot and killed by intimate partners. In 2021, researchers reported that more than 2/3 of recent mass shootings were involved with perpetrators who killed partners or relatives or had a history of domestic abuse. So we have to find a balance here. And so my first question I want to ask all of you is gun storage a good common ground that we all can support? Storing one's guns. Ms. Solomon?
I believe we all can agree that guns should be stored when
Thank
not
you.
in use.
Yep. Ms. Watrell?
But I also believe, I agree with Ms. Solomon, but I also believe they have to be accessible if I am going to have a firearm in my home.
But you believe
to
that
defend
storage
myself.
is good. Thank you. Ms. Glenn
Absolutely.
and Ms. Alcatraz, we know they have to be accessible, but you have children, so do you believe in good storage structure?
Storage is only part of the education and training that we would do for
But
our
it is
families.
included in it. I appreciate
Only
your
part.
response. Let me also indicate that I have a letter from the Jewish Women International I'd like to ask submitted into the record.
Without objection.
Okay, and I'd like to also acknowledge the Moms Demand Action for your leadership. And I think what I'd like to conclude on is I believe in empowering women. I believe any hearing that would suggest that any difference between protecting domestic violence victims is untoward and incorrect. I do want to leave a topic that is somewhat related about empowering women, and I have paid tribute to her and acknowledged her, and that is the horrific reproductive rights legislation that we have in Texas that has allowed an innocent mother of 31 years old to actually flee our state to be able to save her life and to be able to have additional children, and that is Kate Cox. So when we talk about empowering women, we need to talk about all issues. Ms. Glenn, I'm very pleased to see your leadership on these issues, but I want to make sure that your leadership is not diminished. You want to train women, but you want to make sure that people know that a gun can be very detrimental. And I guess as I close, so can detrimental reproductive denial that would allow a young woman or force her to flee and to prosecute innocent medical providers who are simply trying to save lives. We should not prosecute anyone for trying to save lives. With that, I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. I recognize myself for 5 minutes. I'll begin first with just two points here. Part of the reason that you have this problem is that you have prosecutors not prosecuting. They're letting people out on DVs, domestic violence, particularly misdemeanor charges, and they let criminals back on the streets. And that's a problem. I used to be a prosecutor who prosecuted domestic violence cases. I want to go now to the testimony that the written testimony, and Ms. Alcazar, in your opening statement, you said, the reality is that violent criminals, many with evil intent, do exist and are terrorizing us. Today, I want to be part of a respectful, productive dialogue about how we can empower and protect law-abiding gun owners, especially the rising demographic of women. Briefly, can you tell us what you think empowers women who potentially could be victims of domestic violence?
Yes, thank you very much for the question. And just to kind of summarize what I had intended to say earlier, it seems like we have a very big problem with the definition of empowerment here, because we keep hearing these ideas that, and I quote, "We failed to protect them. We protect her, we protect them." It's not about, that's not empowerment. If someone is failing to protect us, it's not their job to give us something or take away something or influence us in that way. To empower us means to allow us, enable us, and affect us in positive ways. And to empower women in this specific environment with the Second Amendment is not take away their options or say we failed in protecting them. It's saying, you know what, you protect you and we support that. And one way to do that is the firearm. The gun is never the solution. It is an option, and it is a protected option that anyone should be able to have if she so chooses so. And along with that empowerment comes the training and the resources and the commitment to make that decision for themselves.
Thank you. And I think, Ms. Solomon, I'm on you. You said in your statement, and you talked about this, I realized that I had to become my own first responder, responsible for my safety and that of my child. Please talk to us about that in relationship to empowerment.
I always tell people, do you know how long 90 seconds is? And 90 seconds is being generous when we talk about law enforcement responding. And we hear that domestic violence is the most dangerous call. So in those 90 seconds, if you don't have a firearm and you do not want to fight one or two attackers as a woman, that is a very long time. And so empowering yourself to be able to live and empowering your child is a God-given right.
I appreciate that. And you're right, 90 seconds can be like a long time. And quite frankly, where I live, the response time is closer to 12 to 15 minutes. Ms. Wottrell, you said the criminal mind doesn't care about how many laws they break. Their focus is on finding a place with the least amount of resistance where they can cause the most death and destruction. Please tell us how the Second Amendment empowers you to counter people with malevolent criminal intentions.
Well, the way to summarize it is the only way to stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. Someone that has the experience and has the knowledge of how to handle a firearm. And when these mass killings come up and criminals are looking for least resistance and doing the most damage, there is not any law that I think they would ever say, oh, I shouldn't do that because I'm not allowed to have a firearm. They've already made that decision. They've already broken ultimate law in wanting to kill somebody, just like my abuser wanted to kill me.
And I would just say, all of you had such compelling stories, all four of you, and very informative. I want to ask one more question to you, Ms. Wottrell, because your statement said, we are being targeted and discriminated against politically, financially, and socially. When you said we, who are you referring to?
Women of all race, financial status, all women in the country. That's my belief. Yes.
Thank you. And I'm going to now, the question was asked by one of my colleagues across the aisle, whether the individual who was trying to attack the pregnant lady and her husband, or boyfriend, whoever that family member was he arrested? Yes, he was arrested. He was charged. And I'm going to enter that into the record without objection. Then additionally, we need to talk about what the real problem is in red states. It's blue cities. That's where the real problem is for violence. And so I'm going to introduce now a report called the Blue City Murder Problem, and do that without objection. With that, I thank the witnesses again. I thank each of you for being here.
I'd like to submit something.
Yes, please go.
Thank you. Another topic.
Okay.
To add to the work that the Biden-Harris administration are doing to work with all of you, it is to submit into the record their announcement of a number of reducing gun violence initiatives. Is first of all establishing the State Office of Gun Violence Prevention, which should really help all of you, and I encourage you to participate with them on the issues that you are concerned about, because it talks about reinforcing responsible gun ownership, and it does include storage. That's just not one of the things. Working with the industry, and I don't think it sees, I'm asking unanimous consent to submit it. It doesn't say anything about blue states or red states or blue cities or red states. It just talks about Americans working together to make us all safe. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Without objection. Again, thank you for being here. Thank the audience for being here as well. With that, we are adjourned.